friends. Welcome to today's session. Uh, Again, in continuation with our yesterday's discussion, we will be continuing with the constitutional authorities. That is, those authorities who have been created by the Constitution under the provisions of the Constitution, not only their creation, but also their role, their functioning, what they are expected to do, and their other conditions of appointment, removal, etc. Now, these constitutional authorities, uh, we have already studied them to some extent. We have just touched upon these authorities in the context of our earlier discussions, maybe on center-state relations, or with respect to mostly center-state relations, because these authorities are not only constitutional authorities, but they are created and controlled by way of the intervention or participation of the president and the parliament, because their roles are though governed by the provisions of the constitution, but they are assigned certain duties, certain responsibilities, and when during the course of those performing those duties and responsibilities, they have to submit their reports, which are in turn placed before the parliament. Again, we come back to the original concept of the democratic republic federal system of governance. Now, in the democracy, whatever may be the authority, it's the rule of law, and whatever may be the authority is subjected to the not only the rule of law, but to answerable to the people of the country, and not directly, but in the parliamentary system, it is through their representatives, elected representatives. And who are the elected representatives? They are the members of the parliament. So ultimately, will of the people is being exercised through the parliament. Now, we have seen during center-state financial relations, a very important part of the center-state relations, that how the finances, because there are different type of taxes, taxation, which is certain taxes which are levied by the center, certain taxes which are levied by the or collected by the states, how they come into one kitty, that is the consolidated fund of India or the consolidated fund of the state. And there, the crucial issue is how they will be distributed to the states. That is the real test of federalism, because states do not have enough resources, financial resources, to run their affairs. And certain states, we see that where there is more agricultural production, more industrial production, or more, there's more trade and commerce, they are considered as well-off states, developed states. We can name Maharashtra, we can name Gujarat, we can name Tamil Nadu. Now, these are the states which have got good amount of industry and trade and commerce. And we look at the agrarian states which are doing very well, is like Punjab, like Haryana. They are fertile states. So there the agricultural production is more, and hence the incomes are more. So what happens as far as those states are concerned, where their own generation of income revenue is more, they are considered as developed or well-off states. But there are certain states where these activities are not there. Not much of industry, not much of agriculture production. So how they will survive? They have to run their administration, conduct the governance of the state. And for that, you need money. Now that money has to be shared by the center. So whatever taxes, whatever levies are collected by the center, they are put in one consolidated fund. And then from that, how that distribution will be made? That is a very crucial question. If it is left to the central government only, then there are chances that due to political reasons, due to certain other factors, it will be like whims and fancies of the central government. Now, that is not acceptable in a federal system of governance. So, if it is left to center, they may be, partial, or they may be biased because of various reasons towards certain particular states. So, the states should not be starved of enough financial resources to run their governance. So, for keeping that in mind, the constitution makers decided upon a constitutional authority, an independent body, autonomous body, not one single person, but in the form of a commission, a number of persons, so that they can decide about what should be the revenue sharing formula. Now, this decision is not final. This is only kind of a recommendatory in nature. But they are the experts. They give an independent view of how the revenues should be shared, how the grants in aid should be provided to the financially starved or financially needed states. So that work has been assigned constitutionally to the Finance Commission. Finance Commission of India. Now, what is the composition, how they are appointed, how they function, that we are going to study today. So, since it is a constitutional authority, so the creation of the constitution, Article 280 deals with Finance Commission. Now, it has been given the status of a quasi-judicial body. What does it mean? See, we have earlier heard about this word, quasi. That means partly. It's not fully judicial authority. We call our system of governance as quasi-federal system. That means it is not truly federal. Though it is called federation, it is a federal system of governance, but it is not truly federal. It has got more unitary characteristics. That is why it is given the nomenclature of a quasi-federal system. Similarly, if any authority is given an adjudicatory duty. What is adjudicatory duty? Adjudicatory function, that they can act as a judge. They can pass certain orders which are judicial in nature. That means the process is judicial. They hear, they collect evidence, they examine the evidence, they apply the principles of natural justice, and they follow certain principles of the laws and give their final, inference. we cannot call it a judgment because it's not truly judicial in nature. They are partly judicial, quasi-judicial body. That means Finance Commission will hear others. We have already, clarified the principles of natural justice, audi altum partem, that the other party should be heard. So they hear the other parties, but they give their own judgment, not exactly judgment, but their own assessment. So they every 5 year, every 5th year or earlier, the president shall constitute a finance commission. This is what is written in the constitution. So president will have to, now president does not act on his own. He acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So it is basically on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers that the President will issue an order appointing the Finance Commission. What is the composition? Composition is that there is one chairman and 4 members appointed by the President. And they are eligible for reappointment, subject to their eligibility. And what is that eligibility? We will see. But unlike some other constitutional authorities, we have seen yesterday and day before that they are not eligible for reappointment. But the members of the Finance Commission are eligible for another term provided they are otherwise eligible. So, office till the presidential order, that means they hold the office as long as the president requires. Right? Parliament to determine the qualification and manner. Now, this qualification of the members or the chairman are not given in the constitution. So, it is for the parliament to decide as to what will be the qualification of the persons who are to be appointed as members or the chairman, and in what manner their selection or their appointment will be done. So, when it is left to the parliament, now parliament has specified certain qualifications. What is that? Chairman should be an expert in public affairs. It is not written what kind of expertise is there, but the parliament will decide as certain, that the person should have what is public affairs. Public affairs means including whatever is there in the governance. So he should have worked, he should have been an expertise, has gained the expertise in governance. So governance means the dealing with the public and dealing with their different kind of affairs. That is mainly in the comes under the subject of public administration. So in public administration, what does it mean? That there is a maxim or a saying in public administration that we deal with the government from cradle to grave. What does that mean? I am talking of public affairs. That means from the time we take birth, we come to this world, till the time we leave, till the time of our death, we are all the time, all 24 hours, we are dealing with the government or governance. You may say, how? Now, this class is being conducted online, right? What we need for this is of course, the equipment is our own, Your equipment is your own, but what you need to operate that equipment is the electricity, is the internet. And then who's providing that? It is the job of the public administration, that is the government. All these utilities. So we travel in the transport. If it is a public transport, again the government is there. If it is private transport, still we are using the roads which is public. We are following certain traffic rules which are governed by the law. So law is created by the government, again legislature. So this is how our interaction throughout our life is with the public administration. And this public administration is also termed as public affairs. Now he should have expertise in that. The four members are either should be judge of the High Court or qualified to be so. That means he need not be a judge of the High Court, but he should be qualified to be a judge, should meet the qualification criteria. Specialized knowledge of finance and accounts of the government. That means there are certain specialists who are economic specialists. They know the affairs of the financing and accounts, because this is a finance commission. It is going to deal with so many entry cases and the technical part of the finances, how the finances are managed. So they have to be experts and have the specialized knowledge, experience in financial matters and in administration. So there may be, some civil servants also, some IRS officer, even IAS officer, because administration, experience in administration, mostly they are retired officers who are posted there. Special knowledge of economics, because they are dealing with the finances, revenue, taxation, etc. So these are the specified qualifications which have been specified by the Parliament. Now, what are the functions? Finance Commission gives its recommendations to the President. What kind of recommendations? As I earlier said, they are not the decisions, they are only recommendations which may be accepted, which may not be accepted. Okay, so what are those? First is distribution. These are important, so please listen to this carefully. The net proceeds of taxes and the allocation of the respective shares of such proceeds. Now, what do we mean by net proceeds of taxes? First thing is, whatever taxes are collected, they are called gross proceeds. When we talk of our income also, we say whatever income is there accrued to us or comes to us is the gross income. That means there are no deductions from that. But once taxes are deducted, after taxes, whatever is left is called the net income. Same is the case here. Here it is the first the gross proceeds, but then there is a expenditure on the collection. That means the machinery which is employed for collection of the taxes or revenue, that has to be minus from here, deducted from here. That means the expenses of collection. So gross proceeds minus expenses of collection, this becomes the net proceeds. So after meeting all the expenditure, whatever is generated is the net proceeds of the taxes. Then what principles will govern the grants in aid? This term we have already studied. What is grants means? They are given for one time and then they are non-returnable. Right? So they are given as and when they are required. Certain grants are given in special circumstances. Certain grants are given depending on the urgent financial needs of a state. To augment the consolidated fund of the state, to supplement the resources of the panchayats and the municipalities. Now, we have already studied that there is a consolidated fund of India for the entire country where all the revenues come and it's like a bank account. Okay, but there is a consolidated fund of each state also, where all the money comes in that account and all the expenditure is incurred, regular expenditure. Now there is a contingency fund also, but we are talking as far as Finance Commission is concerned, they deal with the consolidated fund. Now consolidated fund of the state, suppose the balance in the consolidated fund of a state is very less and they are not able to manage it, then in that case, to augment that is, to support that, to fill up that, certain proceeds have to be, certain inputs have to be given in the consolidated fund of the state. And also to supplement the resources of panchayats and the municipalities. When we discussed the panchayats and municipalities, we have seen, and remember at that time also I had mentioned about the Finance Commission, that Finance Commission gives certain recommendations that these Panchayati Raj institutions and the municipalities, that is the local self-government, should not be starved of the funds. So they have their own resources, but those resources are very, very meager. And to supplement them, the Finance Commission will give their recommendation. Other matters referred to it by the President. Very clear. Now, till 1960, it also suggested the grants to the states of Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal in lieu of export duty on jute and jute products. No, Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal are the main jute producing states. So, there was an export duty on jute. So, that export duty was being paid by either the state government or state government organizations or the jute producers, exporters. So, that duty used to come to where? To the center, because imports and exports are under the central government. So, they suggested grants to these states in lieu of the export duty for a temporary period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution. Now, the report of the Finance Commission is given to the President, submitted to the President, and then President will lay it before the Houses of Parliament along with an explanatory memorandum plus action taken report. Whenever there is a report, there is a recommendation, then in that case we have to see what the Parliament must know as to what action has been taken on those recommendations. right? And also a explanatory memorandum, that means the views of the government on that. Finance Commission has got a advisory role only. So its recommendations are only advisory nature and not binding on the government. But we have seen over a period of time, excuse me, that most of the recommendations are generally accepted with some modifications, because that's a commission consisting of experts. So no legal right in favor of the beneficiary states. That means if they have given a recommendation where a state is getting benefited by way of those recommendations, the state will not get a legal right. They cannot go to court or any judicial authority and say that this is what Finance Commission has recommended for us, it should be given. Now, Finance Commission is a balancing wheel of fiscal federalism in India. Now, here I will stop for a moment and then will explain to you what is this fiscal federalism in India. This is very important to understand. Okay? Now, let us see what is this term fiscal means. Those of you who have got economic background may be perhaps knowing it better, but for the convenience and knowledge of the others, information of the others, see what happens in your household also. You have two parts of your budget. What is this? This is the income, and then you have the expenses. This is in general terms, we talk of anybody, even an individual or a household or a business. What is the income and what is the expenses? In the case of the whole country, we have the, instead of saying income, we say revenue. Revenue on one side, that is what is coming into the kitty of the government, and then the expenses. What is the expenses? Now, this budget, annually we get the budget presented in the parliament by the government, finance ministry. What is this budget doing? It is trying to maintain a balance between revenue and expenses, expenditure. What is the present revenue and what should be our revenue, expected revenue in the next year, and what are the present expenses and what will be the expected expenses next year, planned expenses next year. Now, this revenue and expenses, if they match each other, if they are equal, then there is no loss, no gain, no loss. But if the revenue is more, expenses are less, we have a surplus. Okay? If expenses are more and revenue is less, then we have a deficit. So either there is a surplus or there is a deficit, which means in minus, this means in plus. Now, when we talk of the government's expenses are always invariably, it's not a rule, but it happens. It has been happening. It is always on the deficit side. That means the expenses, the revenue is not matching with the expenses. Expenses are more and revenue is less. Why? Can you think of it in our system of governance? Yes, it is because we have a welfare state. It is not like extracting money. The taxes are collected, the revenue is generated for the welfare of the people, to spend that money for the welfare of the state. And for the welfare, for creation of infrastructure, for creation of, for health sector, education, defense, so many sectors are there. So in that, the need is always there. The need is always very high. Even if revenue is high, the need is even more than that. So it is, most of the time, it is a deficit financing. So this is called how you will match. The government will formulate its policy. This is called the fiscal policy. How to manage this. So those policies of the government which are reflected in the budget or from time to time through issue of various directives or instructions or policies, that decides the fiscal system. Fiscal system is revenue and expenditure, how to have that relationship. So this is the fiscal federalism. That means when we talk of revenue and expenses and we talk of federalism means states are given certain amount of autonomy, and but because of their deficit financing, deficit fiscal, in the case of states, a balance has to be made by injecting the funds, the revenue, supplementing it by the center. So that injection of the funds, injecting the funds into the state's kitty so that they survive and they are able to run their governance. That is the fiscal federalism in India. So it is the balancing wheel. Finance Commission, through its recommendation, will say that how much revenue should be shared with the states. So till 2014, it was undermined by the Planning Commission. That means Planning Commission till 2014 was playing a very crucial role. When we study Niti Aayog, we will see, because Niti Aayog replaced the Planning Commission. So we'll see at that time that Planning Commission used to play an important role in creating or suggesting the allocation of this revenue to the states. So that was very important. Recommendation was by the Finance Commission, but actual allocation was done by the Planning Commission. Now it is not done by them, it is done by the government. So this led to a comment by Raja Manar. He was the chairman of the 4th Finance Commission. Since the Finance Commission is a constitutional body, expected to be quasi-judicial, its recommendations should not be turned down by the government unless there are very compelling reasons. That means a chairman of one of the Finance Commissions himself has given these remarks that since it is a constitutional body, its recommendations should not be taken lightly. Unless there are compelling circumstances, compelling reasons, its recommendations should be accepted. But that doesn't happen. So these are the various finance commissions which have been constituted. So we have the now 15th Finance Commission headed by Mr. N.K. Singh, is a former IAS officer and appointed in 2017. It submitted its report in 2020, and the period of implementation is for the 5 years. Right? So that is about the Finance Commission, how it works, the fiscal system that we have just learned. Now we are coming to a very important part, that is the Goods and Services Tax Council. Now you know that earlier, I have discussed this earlier also, earlier the system was with respect to taxes on goods and services. Now what are goods and services? Goods are which are physically produced, they are tangible. This pen is a good, it is part of goods. The clothes we are wearing, they are goods. They are actually manufactured, they are tangible, they can be stored, they can be transported, and they can be consumed as and when required. If you get food, food is goods. When you can keep the food, you can keep the wheat, you can keep the sugar, you can keep milk, and you can consume as and when you require, and how much you require, you consume that much. So it can be stored. Number one, it is produced physically. Number two is it can be, it is tangible, you can see, you can feel it, and it can be stored, and consumption is also as and when it is required. These are, but services are like your banking services. You go to bank, what they are doing is, you are transacting certain business, either depositing money or taking out your money. Can this service be stored? You take the case of hospitality. You go to a hotel. You go there, you consume the services there itself. They'll serve you food, you pay that, come out. You travel by, let's say, flight. You go to the airlines, you go purchase the ticket, board the aircraft, and you consume. That means the moment you reach your destination, the service is over. Telecom. These are the services which are not visible or felt. They are actually consumed and availed. So, goods and services put together make the entire system complete. That is why they have been put together, goods and services tax. That means there will be tax on the goods, there will be tax on the services. Now, this tax was earlier in the form of a tax to be collected by the center and the tax to be collected by the states. When it was collected by the center, it was called Central Sales Tax, CST. And then when it was collected by the states, it was called the States Tax, or simply the Sales Tax. See, earlier, if you remember, if you go and purchase something from a shop, and in the bill, there used to be either sales tax or they used to call it VAT. VAT is value added tax. I'll just briefly explain to you what is VAT, because this is very important. It used to be there earlier, and I remember in the general studies paper, there was a full question when I wrote the examination on VAT and mod VAT, modified VAT. At that time it was there, and this time, the next year, perhaps in 2020 exam also, there will be a question on GST, definitely. Because whatever is currently happening, generally a question is asked on that. Means I am expecting a full question on GST. So that may happen in 2021 also. Now, what is value added tax? Suppose you have a production unit or a factory. You want to produce, let us say, this pen. Okay. Now, for this, what you need is the raw material. Right? What is the raw material for this pen? Is plastic and some other parts. Right? So, when the factory owner, the producer, he purchases the raw material from a seller, he is, or a trader, he is paying tax on this raw material. Right? Now what happens? He converts through his plant machinery, putting labor, etc. He converts it into the product. This is the product. And what addition he has done in the raw material? He has converted plastic into this pen. How? By use of his technology, machinery, capital, labor, so many factors are there. And these are the value additions. So, value addition is there. From raw material to the final product. Now, when you go and purchase this pen from the market, you pay tax on that. Now, suppose raw material costs 100 rupees. After value addition, the cost of the pen becomes 250. Now, he has paid tax on 100 rupees. When we purchase, we pay tax on 250 rupees. Sales tax. That is how it was called value addition tax. But he used to get the benefit of the tax already paid by him. That means if he is selling it to the wholesaler, he is charging from the wholesaler or the retailer. He is the producer. So what is the line? I'll tell you. Now what is the line of chain? What is the chain of selling? Is the producer. Then there is an intermediate channel, maybe a wholesaler or a retailer. And then there is a consumer. Right? So, producer is paying on the raw material from where he procures the raw material. He is selling it to wholesaler and he is charging the wholesaler certain amount of tax. And when the consumer purchases from the wholesaler or the retailer, he also pays tax on the MRP, whatever is the sales price. So tax over tax. But this was modified and this was made the modified VAT, VAT, value added tax. So that means if he is collecting, let us say 100 rupees tax from wholesaler, producer has already paid 50 rupees on the raw material, he will get the benefit of this 50 rupees because it is adding to the value of the product, and ultimately the tax will be finally paid by the consumer only on the final product. In the chain, everybody will get the benefit, right? The same kind of formula is being applied for GST also. If I am consuming, I am purchasing, let us say, a camera for this class, I have paid GST to the retailer or to the shopkeeper from where I have purchased this video camera. Now, this bill is in my firm's name and I have got a GST number. Now, when I deliver the lectures, you people pay me the fees, I am charging GST from you. So, whatever inputs have gone into conducting this class, which includes the camera, the services of this camera, the use of this camera, I will be getting the benefit of that. That means whatever GST I have paid, I will be given the benefit or the advantage of that, and that will be deducted. So that is why if I collect 18% tax from you, I have paid 18% on camera, that part will be adjusted against my collection from your fees. So this is how the value addition takes place and this is how the tax benefit is given. That is what I am telling you is, earlier there used to be sales tax at the state level, a central sales tax. When was the central sales tax levied? See, if the sale was within the state, if something is produced in the state and sold within the state, center is not coming into the picture. Production is within the state, sale is within the state, consumption is within the state. And then only the sales tax of the state will apply. That was the earlier position. How it is changed now, we will see. But if it is an interstate sale, that means the goods is produced in one state, being sold in another state. And in that case, central sales tax used to be applied, which used to be around 4% or so. And the state sales tax differed from state to state. So this is here the CST used to be applied, and this is where the VAT was being applied. So, in the case of interstate sales, some part of taxes used to go to the center and some part will be charged by the state. Now, what the GST did, it merged the two, it combined the two and made one single tax, that is the goods and services tax, to bring about what? Uniformity. That throughout the country, the sales tax rate will be the same. That is, the GST rate will be the same. Earlier, each state used to charge differently, and over and above that, there was a CST. Now, it is a single goods and services tax, which is collected by one agency, whether it is the central agency or the state has been given power to collect, but it comes to one kitty, one account, that is with the center. And from there, a formula is worked out to divide that share among the states and the center. Now, for that division, see, there are two points to be discussed. One is how much will be collected, right? Second is who will be collecting, and third is how the distribution will be made, how distributed. Now, this has to be decided from time to time. It cannot be a single formula. The situation keeps on changing. Sometimes the goods may be in demand more, less, production may be more, less. Certain factors are there. And there is need to curb a particular goods or service. The tax has to be increased. Or if there is some kind of relief is to be given, tax has to be reduced. So that how much part has to be decided. And that how much, who will collect, and how much will be distributed among the states and the center, that is a very important duty, very important function as far as GST is concerned, and that is given to this council. Okay, I have tried to make it very simplified so that you are able to understand it properly before we proceed to the technical parts of it. So, establishment of the council. Now, it has been given a constitutional authority. How? Under 101st Amendment in 2016, a new tax regime which has said GST, Goods and Services Tax, it came into being in place of the earlier taxation system. What was the need? Smooth and efficient administration of this tax requires cooperation and coordination between the center and the states. Now, do you know what does this mean? We have studied in federalism, and we will also be studying when we study federalism as part of our law optional course syllabus, that is called cooperative federalism. Questions have been asked on this. Cooperative federalism. Now, what we see in this setup is it's pure federalism. That is, center and the states, their relationship, how the taxes will be determined, how they will be collected, how they will be distributed. This is all part of the federal system. And here, cooperation of center and the states is required. That is why it is part of cooperative federalism, and this will be one of the examples to be quoted in your answers if there is a question on cooperative federalism. So, what is the purpose? Smooth and efficient administration of this tax. This tax requires what? A cooperation and coordination between center and the states. Now, establishment of a Goods and Services Tax Council or the GST Council, this amendment to the Constitution has brought about. So, a new article was added, 279A, where President was to constitute a GST Council. It has its secretariat at New Delhi, and in the Ministry of Finance, I'll tell you what are the departments in Ministry of Finance. One is the Department of revenue. The other is economic affairs. And the third department, of course, there are four, yes. Revenue, economic affairs, expenditure, and then financial services. The financial services includes banking and insurance. Revenue is like all taxes, collection of taxes, duties, direct taxes as well as indirect taxes. Direct taxes are like income tax and indirect taxes are like customs, excise duties, central excise, etc. Economic affairs is how to manage the economics, like from where to get the money, from where to borrow, from where, what will be the sources, and how they will be spent, how they should be spent, allocation, not actual expenditure, but allocation. Expenditure is how they have to be spent. So these four departments are part of the Ministry of Finance. Now this revenue department deals with the collection of revenue, and GST is one of the main sources of revenue. That is why it comes under the Department of Revenue. And there are secretaries for each department. And the Revenue Secretary is the ex officio secretary of GST Council. I have already explained ex officio by virtue of holding an office. Just because he is holding the office of Revenue Secretary, he is also secretary to the GST Council. Now, what is the vision and mission of the council? Now, if I tell you about the members, since it is the council is appointed by the president, he constitutes. The members are generally the finance ministers of the states and headed by the finance minister, union finance minister. So, because they have to sit and decide about that how much, who, and how to distribute. So, those three important questions have to be decided. So, to decide those three questions, the top level, functionaries of the center and the state dealing with the financial matters should be the members of the council. So, finance minister and secretary's role is the administrative role. So, this is guided by need for a harmonized structure of GST and development of a harmonized national market for goods and services. This vision and mission is guided by this factor, harmonization. This is the main issue. So, what is the vision? Highest standards of cooperative federation in the functioning of the council. The cooperation between the center and the states. The mission is evolving by a process of wider consultation, a GST structure which is information technology driven and user friendly, easy for everybody, every stakeholder. And the stakeholders are, the consumer, the producer, the intermediaries, the government organizations departments and the functionaries who are involved in the collection, etc. So, these are the stakeholders and it should be information technology driven. Now, there is a method of e-bills, electronic bills. Every business organization who applies for, whether involved in goods or services, has to get a GST number. It's a unique number. Now that GST number is quoted in the bills, and there is, it is easy to track from the place of production to the place of consumption. So tracking of goods, it reduces the chances of evasion of taxes. There are two ways, evasion and avoidance. Let me make it clear to you. One is called avoidance of taxes, and then next is called evasion of taxes. Avoidance is that within the rules and regulations, within the laws, you are not breaking any laws, but the laws provide for certain manner in which you can take that advantage and get the tax relief. Suppose, like if you take the income tax, if you are investing in your insurance or for PPF savings, up to a certain limit, you can invest in any of these schemes or mutual funds. That much will be deducted from your total income. That is, the law provides for that. So you are avoiding a tax within the rules and within the law. But if you break the law and you don't pay tax or you evade the tax, that means by breaking the law. Breaking laws. This is no offense because law permits this, but this is punishable. It's an offense. Evasion of tax is punishable, avoidance of tax is not punishable. So this e-bill system or use of this IT in GST has reduced the chances of this evasion because everything can be tracked and there's proper accounting system. Now, council is a joint forum of the center and the states, consists of Union Finance Minister as the chairperson. I have already stated that. Union Minister of State in charge of revenue, Minister in charge of finance or taxation of the state government, each state government. What I have already cleared. Vice chairman is member of states choose and decide his term. Then Union Cabinet, that includes the chairperson of the Central Board of Excise and Customs as a permanent invitee, is non-voting to all proceedings of the council. Now, Union Cabinet will appoint that. Now, who is chairman of Central Board of Excise and Customs? There are two boards. Central boards. One is the Central Board of Direct Taxes that deals with the income tax, and Central Board of Excise and Customs, Central Board of E and C. This is for indirect taxes like customs, central excise, etc. These are the highest bodies, administrative bodies, which help the government in forming certain policies relating to their respective areas of operation. They are consisting of very senior officers from their respective services. IRS officers mainly, but sometimes even IAS officers have also been posted. But mainly the IRS officers, IRS customs or IRS income tax officers. Now, each board has got a chairperson. So here the chairperson of the Central Board of Excise and Customs is a permanent invitee to the council. That means he takes part in the proceedings of the council, but he has no right to vote. Quorum is minimum number of members to conduct the proceedings of the council, and that minimum number is that 50% of the members should be there. Decision is weighted votes of the members present and voting 3/4. Right? 3/4 means what do we mean by weighted? Preferential votes. First preference, second preference, third preference, like that. Decision is on the following principles. Central government has got 1/3 weightage. Weightage means how much say they will be having in the decision making. And all state governments will have 2/3 weightage. Any act or proceedings not invalid on grounds that there is any vacancy or defect in the council. That means that will not invalidate the proceedings, any defect in the appointment of a member, or any procedural irregularity not affecting the merits of the case. This is important, not affecting merits of the case. That means it should not affect, but if the proceedings are conducted with these small irregularities, the whole proceedings will not be vitiated. Now, recommendations are made to the center and the states. That is, what kind of taxes, cesses and surcharges levied by the center, the states and the local bodies that would get merged in GST. This is what I said, what is to be collected. This gives the answer to the first question. What goods and services are subjected to GST or exempted from GST? This also comes here. Model GST laws, principles of levy, apportionment of GST levied on supplies in the course of interstate trade or commerce, and the principles that govern the place of supply. That is how. Second question is answered here. Then threshold limit of the turnover below which goods and services may be exempted. That means if a new startup is there, new enterprise is there, they need not collect or pay GST to a certain amount of turnover. I think it is now about 20 lakhs at the moment for small enterprises. So this threshold limit is decided by the council. Rates, including flow rates with bands of GST. There are different rates, 5%, 10, 18%, 28%. It depends on, it is decided by the council. Special rate or rates to raise additional resources during any natural calamity. They may impose a cess also in case of any need, or they may have a special rate. Special provisions with respect to states which are not industrialized, which are mainly depending on tourism or other means of revenue generation, but they are not industrialized states or not very good in agriculture production. So other matter which relating to GST as the council may decide. Now, council has other functions also. Now, there are certain products which have been excluded from GST. That means the old system of taxation still applies to them. That is with respect to petroleum, crude petroleum, high-speed diesel, petrol, natural gas, aviation turbine fuel. Okay, these are few of them where GST is not being applied, but council will decide or recommend on which date, from which date the GST may be levied on them. Establish a mechanism to adjudicate upon the dispute with respect to recommendations or other implementation between the center on one or more states. In case of any dispute or conflict, council will decide between the center and any state or states on one side and one or more states on the other sides, between two or more states. So center on one side, states on other sides, or between the states. So council will recommend the compensation to the states, that is how much to be distributed. Third question. Answer is here. Okay, so the Parliament determines the compensation. Accordingly, Parliament has enacted the law, the GST Act in 2017. Now we come to another important financial functionary. You know, any organization, even you look at your household expenses, financial matters, what happens? Your parents will be asking you if you have taken, let us say, 1,000 rupees for purchasing, something for you, a cloth, a dress for you. Now, somebody will be questioning you whether the dress you purchased is worth the amount you have spent. Second thing, and the foremost thing is, whether you got 1,000 rupees for purchase of dress, but you have spent it on eating in a restaurant. That means there are two things. One is the purpose of expenditure, and second is how judicially you have spent it, or proper expenditure, proper use of money. Now this is very important because you cannot simply leave the money into the hands of the states or to the ministries or to the departments or to any other organization under the control of the government, maybe public sector undertakings, etc. And then you do not question them as to whether the money allocated to them has been spent properly or not for the purpose it was given to you. Like a state is given money to build a bridge, but they have diverted that fund to construction of a hospital, or given money for hospital, constructed some other building. Now, these type of scrutiny has to be done by an independent agency. And for that, the Constitution has provided for an independent audit agency, Comptroller and Auditor General of India, CAG. Whether the money which has been given, allocated, has been spent for the purpose for which it was allocated, and second, whether it has been properly spent under a proper authority or not. So let us see. CAG is a constitutional authority. Constitution has created. Now, Article 148 creates a CAG. He is the head of Indian Audit and Accounts Department. Now, there are two parts of this, audit and accounts. Again, with those with the economic background would know it better, but let me make it very simple. Accounts means you keep a statement of what has been allotted or what comes in and what has been spent. That means what goes out. Right? So, a proper account has to be maintained as to what has come in, what amount revenue, money has come in and what has gone out. The accounting has to be done properly. This is the work of the accounts department. The audit will look into the first two questions I have raised. Whether it has been properly used under the proper authority and for the purpose for which it was allotted. That means there are no irregularities. To prevent irregularities, a scrutiny has to be done. Now, this scrutiny is done by the audit department. So, there is a service for that which is called Indian Audit and Accounts Service, IAAS, in the same examination which you people are going to write, the civil services examination. This is one of the central services. Now, they are working under the CAG. CAG is the constitutional authority. He is only one person, and below him, the whole audit and account department of the India comes. That we'll see for, how it will be functioning and whether states will be also scrutinized or not. That we'll see just now. He is the guardian of the public purse. Right? End of the session, I'll sum up with the two functionaries, basically the Finance Commission and the CAG. Controls entire financial system of the country at center and state level. So that means even the states also come under the purview of CAG. They are also under the scrutiny of the CAG. Duty is to uphold the Constitution of India. Very important, because if the money for which it is meant or money is misused or misspent, then this democratic structure will be badly affected. Ours is a welfare state. So, for the purpose, the amount has been allotted, it should be spent judicially for that purpose. There should not be any corruption in that, no leakages, no pilferages. It should be meant only for that only. The laws of Constitution of India and laws of Parliament in the field of financial administration. So what Dr. Ambedkar said, it is the most important officer under the Constitution of India, like eyes and ears of the government or for the people. He is the eyes and ears of the people because he is a constitutional authority, not coming under any autonomous authority, not being controlled by anybody, independent, and has tremendous powers. one of the bulwarks of the democratic system of government. Now, other are Supreme Court, judiciary. This is the position which he has given to CAG, Election Commission for Free and Fair Elections. Very important for democracy. UPSC for recruitment of civil servants. And then CAG is the for audit and accounts. All these four agencies are the bulwarks or the main pillars of the democratic system. Now, appointment is by the President of India by a warrant under his hand and seal. Again, like Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, a warrant of appointment is issued. I have already clarified. It is not that warrant which we see, arrest warrant or something. It is like a document and order issued by President. He himself signs it and there is a seal of the President on that. Now, that means President means again on the advice of the Council of Ministers. Oath or affirmation, same way, faith and allegiance to the Constitution, sovereignty and integrity, duly and faithfully to the best of his ability, knowledge, judgment, perform the duties of his office, and uphold the Constitution and the laws of the land. Term is 6 years or up to the age of 65 years, whichever is early. See here, again you can compare with whom? Supreme Court judges. Right? Resignation letter has to be given to the President in case he wants to resign. Removal is like the judge of the Supreme Court. By the President, special majority, ground of proved misbehavior or incapacity. Same condition. This is how you can remember the two. It's kind of an impeachment process. Special majority, you know, 2/3 present and voting, and then majority of the total membership. Constitution itself has provided for the independence of CAG. First thing is security of tenure, cannot be easily removed, can be only impeached, and he does not hold the office on the pleasure of the President. There is a process to be followed to remove him. Not eligible for further government office. Salary and other service conditions are determined by the Parliament, and salary is equal to Judge of the Supreme Court. How much is that? 2.5 lakhs. This is how you can keep on remembering by linking various provisions. Salary pension cannot be to the disadvantage after he has been appointed. Now, this is how you can make it in the form of a illustration. Conditions of service of persons serving in the Indian Audit Account Department. Then there are administrative powers of the CAG, which both of these are prescribed by the President after consultation with the CAG. This is how he functions for his own department. That means he can make the rules and determine the conditions of service of his officers below him, but to be prescribed by the President under consultation with the CAG. Administrative expenses are on the Consolidated Fund of India. That means he doesn't have to depend on any other financial source. That ensures the independence. Not subject to vote of Parliament. So no minister can represent the CAG in parliament. That means its report, the CAG report goes to the president and then he will lay it before the parliament. The minister will not, no minister will present CAG's report. No minister can be called upon to take any responsibility for any actions done by him. That means, see, what happens is how the money is allocated to any particular department, ministry, or any other for any other governmental use. It is a policy matter, right? And that policy matter cannot be questioned because that policy is decided by whom? By the government, Council of Ministers in the cabinet. Cabinet approves every policy decision. That means, and the cabinet, there is a collective responsibility. It is not one minister. If a decision is taken by the cabinet, then all the ministers are collectively responsible. Even if some of them may not even agree to that policy decision, but still, if it is taken, decision is taken by the cabinet, it applies to all the ministers. So that means no minister can be called upon to take any responsibility individually. It is a collective decision. Even if the actions are done by him, but in following that policy. So under Article 149, this article authorizes the Parliament to prescribe duties and powers of the CAG for what? Union, states, or any other authority or body. That means Parliament will decide as to what CAG will be performing with respect to the central government accounts, audit and accounts, with respect to states or any other authority, including PSUs, public sector undertakings. Accordingly, Parliament enacted the CAG's Duties, Powers, Conditions of Service Act 1971. See, Constitution only provides for certain directions. The actual execution is to be done by a law to be made by the Parliament. So, in 1976, it was amended to separate accounts from audit in the central government. That's how I have described earlier, how accounts and audit are different in operation. What are the duties and functions? Audit the accounts related to all expenditure from Consolidated Fund of India, Consolidated Fund of each state, and Consolidated Fund of each union territory, having a legislative assembly that is like Delhi. Because there is a separate consolidated fund for that union territory which has got a legislature. Audits all expenditure from the Contingency Fund of India. I have already explained there are two funds, Consolidated Fund and the Contingency. Contingency, where the expenditure is done, certain amount is allocated for certain amount of emergency situation or contingencies. And State and Public Account of India and the state. Audits Department of the central government and state governments. What they do is, they audit all trading, manufacturing, profit and loss accounts, balance sheets, and other subsidiary accounts. This is how the audit is done. Scrutiny is done. Audits the receipts and expenditure of the center and each state. So, receipt and expenditure. What comes in, what goes out. Audit means scrutiny. Audits the receipts and expenditure of all bodies and authorities substantially financed from the central or state revenues, government companies, and other corporations and bodies when so required by the related laws. Suppose LIC is there, Life Insurance Company, Corporation. It is created by a law, LIC Act. And if the Act provides for audit by CAG, it will be done. Audits all transactions of central and state governments related to debt, sinking funds, deposits. That means whatever they owe to others. They have borrowed and they owe to others. With approval of the President or when required by the President. Audits the accounts of any other authority when requested by the President or Governor. President in the case of central authorities and Governor in the case of state authorities. For example, audit of the local bodies, municipalities, panchayats, etc. If it is requested by the Governor of the state, then they will be doing the audit. Advises the President with regard to prescription of form in which the accounts of the state and center shall be kept. In what format the accounts have to be maintained. Now submits his reports relating to center to the President, and President will send it to the Parliament. With respect to state, to the Governor, and then Governor will send it to the state legislature. Ascertains and certifies the net proceeds of any tax or duty. His certificate is final. Right? Net proceeds means the proceeds of a tax or a duty minus the cost of collection. I have already explained that. Acts as a guide, friend, and philosopher of Public Accounts Committee. Now, this Public Accounts Committee we have already studied when we studied the cabinet committees, parliamentary committees. We have already seen that in the parliamentary committee, this is one of the important committees. Compiles and maintains the accounts of the state governments. Now, in 1976, was relieved of his responsibilities with regard to compilation and maintenance of accounts of the central government due to separation of accounts from the audit. That is departmentalization of accounts. That is, accounts were separated. CAG submits 3 audit reports to the President. What are these? Audit report on appropriation accounts, on finance accounts and public. What is this appropriation accounts? Now, when a money is allocated, its expenditure, the spending from that money, allocated money, is called its appropriation. It should be properly used, appropriated, not misappropriated. Misappropriated means wrongful use. But appropriation, whether it has been used properly, so on that the audit report is given. Then the finance accounts. That means whatever financial transactions have taken place, they are properly accounted for or not. And then audit report on public undertakings. Public undertakings are the government bodies, like they are, we have ONGC, we have a lot of, SAIL, they are all called public sector undertakings. And there, on them, there is an audit report. These 3 audit reports are submitted to the President. Then President will lay these reports to the Parliament, and Public Accounts Committee examines them and reports its findings to the Parliament. So ultimately, it will be again scrutinized by the PAC, and then it will go to the Parliament finally. Appropriation accounts compare the actual expenditure with the expenditure sanctioned by the Parliament. That is, for which it is sanctioned, whether it has been properly used for that or not. Finance accounts show the annual receipts and disbursements of the Union government. Role is to uphold the Constitution of India and the laws of Parliament in the field of financial administration. The accountability of the Executive Council of Ministers to the Parliament in the sphere of financial administration. It is secured through the audit reports. It keeps a tag on them. CAG is an agent of the parliament. What he's doing is, like in a company, what does we do? We engage an auditor, a third party, an outsider who is qualified, chartered accountant. We engage him. He will scrutinize the accounts of the company, each company, and give his auditor's report, which is part of the annual report of every company. Similarly, he is appointed by the parliament. So, and he sends his reports to the parliament through the president. So, he conducts audit and expenditure on behalf of the parliament. Therefore, he is responsible only to the parliament. So, more freedom with regard to audit of expenditure than with regard to audit of receipts and stores and stocks. This is more important where there are chances of pilferages, corruption, etc. Expenditure is very important because receipts are already there. They are from known sources. But expenditure is an area where there can be misappropriation. Decides the scope of audit and frames his own audit codes with the approval of the executive government. To ascertain whether money disbursed was legally available and applicable to the service or for what purpose. Proprietary audit means discretionary. If some authority has been given discretionary power to spend some money, then it has to be looked into whether there is wisdom in that, faithfulness, and economy. That means it is not spent just like that. It should be through certain procedures where there is a economy is maintained properly. It should not be overspent. Limitation is there is one fund which is called secret service expenditure, which is not under the purview of CAG because of its nature. Like intelligence agencies may be paying to their informers. So that has not to be disclosed as to where that money has been spent. But it cannot call for its particulars. But what will happen? Somebody has to be made accountable for that. So a certificate has to be issued from the competent authority of that organization taking responsibility for that the secret fund has been properly used. So the Constitution, CAG to be comptroller as well as auditor general. Comptroller means looking into the accounts and then highest audit authority. In practice, the role of an auditor general only because accounts are basically not much scrutinized by the CAG. Accounts means whatever is there coming in the books and going out, but audit is the main function where they keep a scrutiny and an eye over the system. No control over the issue of money from the consolidated fund. If it is approved, that's what we say a policy decision. CAG will not look into the policy decision. I'll give you one example. CAG in Britain is both. Now, example is very interesting example. You must have heard of 2G scam. The whole 2G scam, so-called, I'll say so-called scam because it is under, the matter is sub judice, can't comment on that whether it was a scam or not, but as popularly it is called 2G scam, was brought into limelight by whom? By the CAG. And how? they did the audit. And when they did the audit, what they found was that this was not the allocation of the bandwidth, etc. It was just allocation was done on selected basis, not through auction. So the CAG gave the opinion that had there been an auction of this 2G system, the government would have saved this much. And by not following auction procedure, the government has incurred a loss of so many crores. Now, remember, this is what? This is a policy decision. Policy decision by the government whether to go for auction or to follow any other procedure. So they said, government said, look, you are not there to look into the policy decisions. You cannot say, had this happened, this would have been saved. Because this thing did not happen, so much loss is there. All loss is notional. And you have no authority to question the policy of the government. What you can see is scrutiny. For what purpose money was allotted, for what purpose, how the money came properly or not, spent properly or not. You are not to question the policy. So this is how the matter is still before the courts. But this is one area where, of course, CAG brought about the so-called, I'll again say so-called irregularities, but in fact, it was like questioning the authority of the government on policy matters. So, role of CAG in auditing public corporations is limited. Why? Because public organizations, most of them they are the corporations, companies incorporated under the Companies Act. So, under the Companies Act, they have to be subjected to independent audit also. So, their CAG may not have much role to play because they conduct their own audit by a third-party auditor as per the requirements of the law. Relationship with public corporations falls into the following three categories. Some corporations are audited totally and directly by the CAG, like Air India, ONGC. There are corporations and government companies audited by private auditors appointed by the central government in consultation with the CAG. So, CAG can conduct supplementary audit. The main audit is done by the private auditors. Then there is this example is the Industrial Finance Corporation. Then there are corporations which are totally subjected to private audit. There CAG will not come into play and they submit their report directly to the Parliament, like LIC, Reserve Bank of India. There is an audit board under the CAG. Now, establishment was done in 1968 on the recommendations of ARC, audit board as a part of office of CAG. There is a separate board constituted to associate outside specialists to assist the CAG and handle the technical aspects of the audit and accounts. For audit of specialized enterprises like engineering, iron, steel, chemicals, they need specialists for that. Those who are specialists of, like engineering and iron and steel, and CAG may not be much aware of the technical aspects of these areas. There are chairman and 2 members who are appointed by the CAG. So, there is a criticism also. Criticism is CAG should be relieved of the responsibility of audit, abolition of office of CAG. This is what Paul H. Appleby has demanded. On what grounds? This is an inheritance from the colonial rule. This is repressive and negative influence. Parliament has greatly exaggerated notion of the importance of auditing. CAG function is not really a very important one. Auditors do not know much about the good administration. Highly pedestrian function with a narrow perspective and a very limited usefulness. A deputy secretary in the department knows more about the problem. Now, main criticism, if you see, is that the CAG is not a specialized agency. It does not know the actual day-to-day functioning of the department. Various departments are there. Now, what happens is, in one department, there may be certain peculiar requirements of expenditure. For that, the money might have been spent. Though money was allocated for some different purpose, but it was spent for some emergency situation. Later on, it is sent back for the post-approval after the money has been spent. But in between, if there is an audit by CAG, CAG will take it as a misappropriation or misuse. But they are not actually, that is what he said, Deputy Secretary may be knowing much better than the functioning of his own department than the CAG. So this is a major criticism. But we have to move to the positive side and say this is a constitutional authority to a third party, independent, autonomous organization having constitutional protection to see that the money is spent properly, the government, the public money is spent properly. This is on the positive side. So if a question comes, critically examine, you have to write this criticism and then conclude with a positive note. So with this, we come to an end to today's session. We have covered 3 constitutional authorities today: the Finance Commission, the GST Council, and the CAG. So any questions, any queries? Otherwise, we will meet on Monday with a new topic on the same Indian polity. Yes, before I conclude, I have just, in between, I just mentioned that I want to sum up in a very useful manner that Finance Commission deals with distribution and sharing of revenue, and from where the revenue comes? GST. And then who will audit that? CAG. So to remember, just to remember that, you can line them up like this. The source comes from GST, how it is to be distributed. I mean, GST is one of the sources. There are other sources also. And then who will do the audit, see that it is properly used, is the CAG. Okay? Then good night and my best wishes. See you on Monday with a new topic. Thank you.
For more videos, subscribe to BN by IAS and press the bell icon to never miss an update.